is the launch of the Victorian Socialist Manifesto, a manifesto for real change. But before we get into the speakers that we have tonight, I first want to acknowledge the land on which we stand, and acknowledge the traditional owners of that land, the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This land was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. We stand with First Nations people in their ongoing fight against racism and dispossession. And in particular tonight, I want to acknowledge Janelle Wallam, our star netball player who has refused to wear the jersey that's been provided by Gina Reinhardt. It's an important stand against the destruction of our planet, an important stand against the bourgeoisie who think they can just mess with our lives, destroy Indigenous land and destroy our planet. Under the Andrews Labor government, Aboriginal people have experienced broken promises as they've had to fight against the destruction of their sacred sites. They've had to fight a vicious, racist police force and fight for justice for Aboriginal people murdered by this state. Australian capitalism is born from genocide. The fight against racism then has to be key to a socialist vision for transforming society. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Tonight we're going to present to you a socialist manifesto for real change, because things certainly need to change. The climate crisis, the cost of living crisis, the crisis in the healthcare system. And what do the major parties have to offer us in the face of all of this horror? It is just more divide and rule politics, relentless attacks on trans people, racist panics about refugees and migrants, and attacks on Aboriginal sovereignty. All an attempt to distract us from the great robbery that is going on right in front of our eyes. Victorian Socialists offer a politics of hope, that our collective resistance can stand up to the powerful, that those of us who are sick and tired of seeing our planet burn, sick of the struggle to pay the rent, to pay bills, sick of the disgusting bigotry that permeates capitalist society, all of us, workers, students, migrants, refugees and pensioners, we're gathering here today because we will not tolerate a politics that is built on screwing us over at every turn, and instead we are coming together to change everything. So our speakers tonight are going to talk about different aspects of the platform that we're taking into this election. First up, we're going to hear from our candidate for the Western Metro, Liz Walsh. Yeah, clearly she needs no introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway. Liz tonight is going to speak about our fight to reverse privatisation, to fund the services that we need to make our lives livable. There's a lot, I think, to recommend Liz as a socialist candidate. 25 years as a committed socialist fighter. She got her start as a high school student when she participated in the walkouts against that filthy far-right racist Pauline Hanson. Yeah, it's not a bad way to enter politics. Since then, she's been a consistent fighter for refugee rights, for workers' rights, standing with Palestine and more. Wherever injustice rears its head, Liz Walsh is there to beat it back. Most recently, Liz led some of the major demonstrations in support of abortion rights. When Roe v. Wade was over, filthy bigot wiped off his face as he's replaced by a principled socialist, someone who will fight tirelessly for the working class, for the oppressed, and to take on the scum that rule our society today. Thanks, Liz.
Great. Well, thanks, Kath. So when I'm campaigning for the Victorian Socialists door knocking, residents. I often talk about the outrageous inequality that characterises our society. I talk about how the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And I often don't have to finish that sentence because residents finish it for me, because it's common sense, because it's the truth. We have a situation where life is getting harder for working class people. There's the cost of living crisis, our wages are going backwards. Meanwhile, we have billionaires doubling their wealth during the pandemic. And most of these rich fuckers, like the 5 top energy companies in gas and electricity, have paid zero tax over the last 7 years. So there is a class war raging. At the moment, our side is losing. One thing that's driving this inequality has been the privatisation of our public services and assets. We have big corporations making mega profits, billions of dollars by charging sky-high prices. And in Victoria, when we're talking about privatisation, we often think about Jeff Kennett. Boo hiss. Come on, guys. Participatory sport. Yeah. That guy is best known for his slash and burn agenda, the shutting down of public schools, the shutting down of hospitals, the sacking of tram conductors, and also the selling off and breakup of the State Electricity Commission, the SEC. It's a giant scam. Since privatisation, we've had levels of productivity and efficiency plummet. Costs associated with marketing, sales, and bureaucracy have ballooned. And of course, our bills have gone through the roof. Even before the latest price hike, electricity prices had increased at 3 times the rate of inflation over the past 2 decades. But the problem isn't just the Liberal Party. Privatisation has been a core part of the public policy playbook of both Liberal and Labor parties. It was Paul Keating that started the big fire sale of our assets. Think about Qantas, think about Telstra, think about the Commonwealth Bank. In the 1990s, Australia was second ranked in the world for profits from privatisation. We were pioneers. And of course, over the last 19 out of 23 years in Victoria, it's been the Labor Party that has been in power, implementing a neoliberal agenda, selling off the Port of Melbourne, selling off Vic Roads, corporatising government departments, outsourcing to private consultants, running everything with a public-private partnership. Now, one thing that seems to buck the trend has been the recent announcement to revive the State Electricity Commission. So this is a welcome move, and it's brought about through the absolute chaos of the private energy market. But of course, the devil is in the detail. And it seems that the plan has absolutely nothing to do with taking for-profit electricity generation out of the equation. They want to set up a government-owned renewable energy sector or renewable energy producer in partnership with private capital, probably industry super funds, to compete with the private energy market. So the energy market will still be dominated by private companies, by private generators, by private distributors, by private retailers, only they'll now have a new government competitor. So what we need to do is take the whole of the electricity and energy sector back into public hands. That's what's going to drive down bills. That's what's going to drive the transition to renewables. We need an SEC whose primary goal is not making profits for their investors, which is what this government new renewable energy company essentially will do. What we need is for our energy to be driven only by service delivery for ordinary people, because energy is a human right. We have a right to heat our homes. We have a right to hot water. We have a right to cook food. This is a human right. That, and also a right to well-paying jobs. Another example of privatisation is our public health system. We think we have a public health system, But that is only partially true. And it's not just private hospitals or private insurance companies. Core parts of our health system are dominated by private companies. Primary healthcare, allied health services like pathology are all dominated by private companies. When I was pregnant, I was absolutely shocked that a necessary ultrasound scan cost me hundreds of dollars. Hundreds of dollars. I had to have it. Absolutely shameful. This year, one of the key battles, as Kath talked about, for the Victorian Socialist has been taking on the arch reactionary Bernie Finn and his campaign to recriminalise abortion. Yep, Finn in the bin. So we've not just been fighting to defend what we've got. We've been demanding the removal of all barriers for pregnant people to access abortion. So 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women in this country will need an abortion in their lifetime. But most of us can't access abortion through the public system. There aren't all these public clinics out there that we can access. Most of us have to go through private clinics where we have to pay hundreds of dollars. And if we don't have a Medicare card, if we're an international student, we'll have to pay thousands of dollars to access abortion, which is totally unacceptable. So we're fighting for a massive expansion of community health so that abortion care is delivered by free public clinics. We want to ban the outsourcing of public health care to private companies, and of course, we want to fight for a fully funded public hospital system. And I say that last bit because it's not enough for us just to take our services and our assets back into public hands. We need to root out the corporatisation of our public services, the imposing of private market discipline on public service delivery. We need to fight against government cost-cutting and underfunding of our public services. And these can be life and death questions for people. So take Esther, the 000 call service. It's a Victorian government agency, but its funding is tied to a user pays model. It's quite absurd. So every time there's a call and an ambulance or police are dispatched, Ambulance Victoria or Victoria Police pay a fee. And that fee was set in 2004 and hasn't been indexed for CPI. So as you can imagine, this funding model leads this crucial service that is a life and death service totally underfunded. And the only way that they can operate is with emergency payments, emergency top-up funds from the state government. So this means they can't actually hire staff because there's no sustainable funding arrangement. And so we have a situation when there are surges, like when there was the the Thunder asthma event, or recently when they ripped down all COVID protections, and we've led to a massive increase in ill health and disability. We've had a system that's been failing people. So something like 33 people have died over the last year in Victoria because, in part, they weren't able to get through to 000 in time. And sometimes it takes 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes, I think it was over an hour for somebody to get through to 000. So to finish, Victorian Socialists are fighting to take our public services back into public hands. We're fighting to renationalise them. And it will be a fight because we're up against vested interests. We're up against the corporate world that are making billions off what were our services that we used to control and own. And socialists are up for that fight. We fought against Kennett. We fought against Hawke and Keating when they were introducing economic rationalism and neoliberalism, and we will take that fight into Parliament if we're given a chance. We will use that platform to call out all the privatisers, whether they be the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, and we'll use that platform to organise resistance on the ground. And when we say we're fighting to take public services back into public hands, we're not just talking about rewinding the clock to the 1950s, 60s, 70s. We're fighting for the future. We're fighting with socialist politics fueling our activism. And that means we're fighting for democratic control over our services, not just public ownership, but for genuine democracy, for ordinary people to have a real say over the collective resources, over the wealth that our labour produces. That's what socialism is about, genuine democracy, and that is the vision that will fuel our fight. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. And if you want to hear more from Liz Walsh and the Victorian Socialists in the West, then you really need to get to their event happening at 4 p.m. Sunday, the 6th of November, a Socialist Voices for the West. And you'll hear from Liz and some of her comrades who've been working with her for decades in the fight for workers' rights, for women's rights, and against racism. And speaking alongside her as well will be Jorge Herrera, Victorian Socialist first elected person. Jorge is the Socialist councillor in Maribyrnong. So yeah, I think there's some flyers going around for that now. It'd be great to see lots of faces out there. So our next speaker is Catherine Robertson. She's the Victorian Socialist candidate for the seat of Laverton, also out in the West. She became a socialist activist when she went to university and threw herself into the fight against Abbott's austerity budget and the attempts to deregulate university fees. Catherine is also a radical climate activist. She travelled to Queensland to help organise the socialist struggle there, and in particular to be part of the campaign that tried to stop the Adani coal mine. She was part of the mass protests of the civil disobedience up there and was arrested for the crime of trying to save our planet. It's pretty much as soon as she came back to Melbourne, she came back to find that Victoria and New South Wales were on fire. We were going through some of the worst bushfire crises that we've had in many years. So as an activist with University Students for Climate Justice, USCJ, Catherine helped to organise a snap demonstration in the wake of those fires to say this is not just some natural disaster. We're not just going to sit back and accept this. Actually, this has been caused by the greed of capitalism, and what's more, it's been the kind of neoliberalism, the defunding of services that Liz just spoke about, that meant there was no decent support for people who were then suffering the consequences of those things. It's absolute outrage that so much of our fire services is outsourced to volunteers. So Catherine was part of organising that demonstration that saw 30,000 people out on the streets, you know, despite the kind of tut-tutting and warnings that came from the Andrews Labor government, that came from the media. People got out there to say, this is not good enough. I think Catherine really embodies the sort of radical activist politics that Victorian Socialists stand for. So she's going to speak a little bit about VS's policies for climate justice.
Great. Well, that was a glowing review. I wanted to start actually with an article that I was reading earlier today by a member of the Victorian Socialists called Andrew Charles. And it was an article on the aftermath of the recent 1 in 100 years flood event that swept across Victoria in this past week. And, you know, it goes through how in the floods, as many of us here know, hundreds of people lost their homes, their possessions, their belongings, and unfortunately we've seen in regional Victoria even the loss of life. And in Maribyrnong in particular, where I grew up out in the west, we also saw the flood cleanup continues now after the devastating rise, which was only told to residents that it was occurring at 6 a.m. in the morning when it was too late. And it's been revealed as well in the aftermath of the floods that An entire floodplain actually in Maribyrnong was redirected into housing after the erection of some walls to save the Flemington racecourse. Which I'm sure is a really lovely, band-aid on the wounds for the residents that lost that housing have been thrown out to know that, in a couple of weeks' time, the rich and wealthy of Melbourne will have a racecourse to stand high and dry on and to bet and gamble. And something that stuck with me since I read this story is when Andrew says, it's when all of the climate ducks are in a row that extreme weather events manifest. And the Victorian Socialist environmental policy is one that, for this November state election, it's one that recognises that everyone here does too, that the climate ducks have been in a row for a very long time, and they've been aligned for a very long time. The climate crisis has seen irreversible and catastrophic weather events impact billions of people around the globe. 1 in 100-year flood events like the one that just happened across Victoria occur annually. We see floods, wildfires, heat waves, dust storms, droughts happening annually in every country around the world. And what I just listed, those major events, that's just in the past 12 months, you can point to countries that have been entirely devastated by one of them. And this is the reality, the climate reality that we live in. It's the one that our activism takes place in, and it's the one that we're fighting to change. And it's also one that has been birthed to us by the greed of a small, profit-hungry minority. So the fight for the planet is not a distant question. It's one that means we must act immediately, we must act with urgency, and we have to have radical, radical horizons if we're going to confront the planet that surrounds us. So we need to phase out the use of coal for energy production. That's, hardly a radical thing to say, but if you look at our political system, you'd think it was. That should have happened, that needs to happen immediately. We need to reverse the appalling decision that the ALP made in 2020 here in Victoria to lift the ban on gas exploration, which has seen the destruction of Indigenous land, already occurring since that year. And we need to prohibit the development of all new fossil fuel projects immediately. And our targets need to be serious. The idea that a target which talks about, net zero in 2050 is at all remotely what we need in this current climate is a joke. We need emissions to be reduced by at least 75% below 2005 below the 2005 levels in order to have net zero by 2030. But we have to go beyond that. Net zero is only, the start. We need a permanent net negative emissions economy by 2040. If these sound very specific, it's because it's the exact policy that the Victorian Socialists are taking to Parliament. And we also need to radically redesign our cities and how we power them. If you grew up in the West, you'd know that it's a major heat sink. Every summer there, it's like sitting on a frying pan, same out north. And that means that we need to have urgent regrowth of our urban tree canopy, protecting these things instead of cutting them down for development. We need accessible and free public transport, not one that's, literally unavailable for a large majority of people across Melbourne. And we need the mass introduction of affordable electric infrastructure. All of this should be powered by solar and wind farms, an upgraded power grid, not one that's been lying like a relic for the past couple of decades, for a quick transition to an all-electric and post-gas energy system. And we need a renewable manufacturing sector that's publicly owned with guaranteed secure jobs and retraining for workers displaced from the fossil fuel industry. And instead of death by 1,000 cuts in environmental research, we need to prioritise developing adaptation strategies to protect biodiversity, water resources, and agricultural yields here in Victoria. All of these things are hardly rocket science, actually, and they're not even impossible. They're actually very easy to implement. I'm not standing here talking about things that, we've just kind of thrown up on a wheel. Thousands of people around Melbourne, tens of thousands of people around the world have been developing and devoting their lives to figuring out the infrastructure we need, the science that we need to save our planet. And it's one that could be introduced if those people had the power to do so quite quickly to create sustainable cities and our sustainable lives. But the thing that stands in the way between us and this future is capitalism. It's the commitment by both of our major parties to the interests of fossil fuels, to maintaining a system in which the pollution of our planet is used to line the pockets of the rich and powerful. The rich and powerful who can, for at least their lifetime, out-yacht or out-jet the impacts of their own destruction. Maybe even, fly to Mars. Maybe, we'll see. Hopefully not. And this state of affairs isn't going to change itself. Victorian Socialists believe that in order to win, we have to fight. And we have to defend not only our right to do so, but also the activists that are fighting right now. So to finish, I wanted to talk about one of the most, I think, despicable elements of the Daniel Andrews government, his recent environmental policy, which is the ongoing commitment to the endless logging of our native forests. These forests are integral to our biodiversity, to our terrestrial carbon stores. They are key places, actually, in which we have a chance to save, the little kind of parts of the environment, the natural environment that we have left. And recent laws have been introduced by the Andrews government to protect this logging ongoing. Draconian anti-protest laws are threatening currently protesters that are protesting against the logging of our native forests with jail time and mass fines for their defiant action. These laws have been fought against and they must be repealed. There's no question that, why Andrews is introducing laws that target environmental protests. When you saw, and Kath mentioned, tens of thousands of people taking to the streets in 2019, a whole entire generation of young people that have been radicalized by the planet burning around them and being sold absolute crumbs by our establishment. And like Kath said, I've already been arrested by one Labor government, even though it was a little bit further up north, but I'm more than willing to do so again. But the importance of our movements against this heinous system, against a system that wants to drive us off the cliff, that has all of the science, all of the technology in front of it to change the trajectory that we're on, the importance of building a mass movement in the face of that is integral, and it's a project that the Victorian Socialist wants to throw itself into wholeheartedly. So we've attended the protests against the laws, and we stand solidly with those protesting in our native forests right now under the threat of jail time. So, not the Labor Party, not anyone in power today can quell the resistance that's coming for it. We all live on this planet, but we, the working class, the people here in this room, the environmental protests, the people that have dedicated their lives to seeing a better and livable world, we're the people that have the interest and the power in changing it. And I think that Victorian Socialists, the project to put someone like Liz or Jerem, a socialist in Parliament, is not just to see someone that's going to fight for us in a very hostile, a hostile place where the interests of these rich and powerful dominate, but also someone that's going to fight with us, someone who is going to take to the streets with us, the workplaces, and help build a construction of a mass movement and continue to build the confidence of people to take action for themselves. So hopefully the next ducks that line up.
Excellent. And as Catherine says, we are a grassroots movement. For us, it's not that we're looking to just get one person into Parliament to automatically change things. If elected, Liz and Jerem will absolutely be in the face of every right-wing politician that wants to sell off state assets, that wants to, grind refugees or trans people or whoever they've decided is their latest target into the dust. They will be there to push back, to be a megaphone for every movement on the streets, to encourage people to take part in collective action. And actually, that's what the whole Victorian Socialist project is built on. Part of why we've gathered you here today is because we actually want something from you. We want two somethings from you, actually. We want your time. We want you to help us get out to as many people as we possibly can and convince them to put people before profit this election, to vote up socialists, to make history by putting socialists in Parliament for the first time in decades. And I can see that there are many, many of our extremely wonderful and dedicated volunteers in the room at the moment. People should know that so far we have knocked on over 80,000 doors. And in the last few weeks, we've had over 1,000 people ask to put up a Victorian Socialist sign in their front yard. We are making a real splash for socialism this election to tell people actually there is an alternative to the same old business as usual politics that puts us last. Instead, we can get together and be part of a campaign that will put people first. So if you can get involved, we want you to be part of that. We want you going out there, knocking on doors. Tomorrow we'll have an opportunity in both the West and the North. You can talk to any of the Victorian Socialist members here about how to get involved with that. But one of the big things that I want to ask you to do today is to put aside some time in the last 2 weeks of the election. So on the 26th of November, Election Day, Victorian Socialists will be staffing 390 booths across the west and north of Melbourne. We need your help to do that. We need your help to stop every voter who comes along to get a leaflet in their hand to talk about our politics, to convince them of why they should change their vote this election and vote socialists. And it's not just those 390 booths on election day. Actually, about half or more than half of Victoria will vote in the early voting period. So that's 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, we'll be staffing 41 polling booths for 8 to 12 hours a day across Melbourne's north and west. We want you to try to put aside some time for that. Not the whole 12 hours, obviously. But donate what time you can. And over here, you'll see some of our volunteer organisers. You can come and speak to them after the speeches and sign up and get involved to help out on election day and also in that early voting period. Really, the early voting is an opportunity to get in some practice before the big day. So definitely do sign up to get involved in that. Okay, our next speaker is Colleen Bolger. Colleen is an Australian Services Union delegate, and she spends her professional life as an advocate for workers, defending them against their bosses and fighting for justice for workers who've been made sick or ill or even killed as a result of their bosses, particularly representing those who've suffered asbestos-related diseases and illnesses. So Colleen has been a socialist activist for many years. One of her proudest moments as an activist was in Woomera in 2002, outside that detention centre, when activists from across Australia journeyed out to the desert to let the refugees there know that there were people on their side, people who wanted to welcome them into this country. Colleen was there and part of the group of people who helped to shake those fences. There were refugees on the inside who shook their side of the fences, who pulled their own fences down. Colleen was part of the activists on the other side who were pulling down the next set of fences, and they pulled down those rotten fences, and hundreds of refugees escaped, often for only a brief period, some for longer than that. But that is the sort of politics that we want to see, mass defiance that tears down every vestige of oppression, of discrimination, of inequality. The thing that Colleen's going to be talking about today is our policy for homes for all. I think one of the most obvious outrages of the system today is that we have more empty homes than we have homeless people. There is a very obvious solution to that problem. The only thing standing in the way is the profit motive. And I see tonight that we've got activists who've been involved in the campaign for Homes Not Prisons, people who've been involved with Friends of Public Housing, and also comrades from RAHU, the Renters and Housing Union. You know, these are important groups that are taking the stand, that are making a political contest of the sort of outrageous, kind of unfair private rental market that we have today. So welcome, Colleen.
Thanks, Kath. Well, it's obvious that our housing system is in crisis. That is widely acknowledged. What is not widely acknowledged, what is instead taken for granted, is why. And the reason for it is because our basic right to a home is dictated not by need, but by the market. That's the problem. See, people expect and deserve even more than just a roof over our head. We expect that our home will be a place of comfort and of security, enjoyment even. And yet it is exactly this expectation that banks and landlords and developers seek to make a profit out of. The cost of housing, whether it's a person who's renting or who's paying off the mortgage of their family home, is one of the most persistent worries that people have with the cost of living crisis. It's bad enough that inflation is at 6.5% and increasing, but rent has increased by 14% around the country in the last financial year. For a person with an average size mortgage, they're paying an additional $8,000 a year for the cost of their loan. To break that down, that's roughly about 10% of a teacher's salary. You know, that's holiday money. That's the money you put aside when your car breaks down and you need a new one. And that's even before you get to the rising cost of living in every other aspect that people are dealing with. Working class people, the people who make our coffee, who answer our phone calls to different companies, who build our homes, who build our hospitals, you name it, working class people are who make our city run are being priced out of living here. It's abundantly clear that as a start, what we need is a cap on rent. Caps on rent for the next 5 years. That is what would take some pressure off renters. And we need to put in place protections that stop landlords being able to evict people. Real protections, not the Labor government's signature policy of allowing us to put a picture hook on the wall. Protections that mean that landlords can't jack up the rent. Well, yeah. Jacking off right to the bank. People said that when house prices would fall, then there would be finally greater accessibility for working class people trying to buy a house. But that's not what's happened. Actually, people who took out huge loans to afford a house are now poorer because their house values are falling and they're paying more to the bank in interest. This is going straight into the coffers of the banks, who don't pass on those higher rates to savers but pocket the difference. That's why the big four banks are making record profits while people are struggling to pay off their homes. So in response, the VS Manifesto wants to put back onto the political agenda a state bank, one that would offer low-cost loans to workers to afford affordable homes. That also means calling on taxing the developers so that we can go on a massive building expansion to provide affordable homes for workers. The Labor government didn't even have the backbone to follow through on their demand for a meagre 1.75% tax on developers. Developers who've been lining their pockets on the property prices boom over the last few decades. We need to do a lot more than that. One of the policies that sends shivers up the spine of the rich that I want to talk about now is that we will seize their vacant homes. We're coming for them. You better believe it. There are, as Cass said, there are roughly as many vacant homes in Melbourne as there are people sleeping on the streets on any given night. It's pretty obvious what can be done here. Homelessness is not a product of a shortage of supply, it's a product of the way our housing system is organised. And so we propose that people should be limited to 2 homes that they own. I mean, that's double the number that I've ever lived in at one point. But it pushes the people who see housing as a speculative investment out of the market. Lastly, I want to talk about public housing, one of the scourges of this Victorian state Labor government. During the tenure of Andrew's government, the public housing waitlist has increased by 50%. There's about 100,000 people on it today. Labor tout building 12,000 new dwellings over the next 4 years, or over 4 years, as the biggest spend on public housing in decades. They're proud of it. I'm not. The only way that they can tout this as being a gift is if you accept that if you ignore the fact that public housing has been totally neglected for decades, because this policy will leave 3/4 of the people who need public housing on the wait list. That is nothing to be proud of. As you would expect, our manifesto advocates a public housing build that meets the need of those who are on the wait list and beyond. 150,000 homes in 10 years and taxing the developers to pay for it. As one or two socialist voices in Parliament, Liz and Jerem obviously aren't going to be building those homes. But what we can say is that if Liz or Jerem are elected, they won't cave into the developers. They'll stand with public housing tenants and renters against evictions, and they'll be there to expose Andrews when he's painting something as a gift when it's actually a sell-off. That's how we can make a difference. The major parties won't do anything to disturb the ability of developers and banks to make money off housing, whereas our manifesto gives us the framework for an alternative vision, a vision for a housing system that is organised on the basis of working class people's need for a home. That's at the heart of our manifesto, to put people before profit.
Thank you, Colleen. And I think I might have neglected to mention it before, but Colleen is our candidate for the seat of Melbourne. Yeah. So I said before that there's 2 things we want from you tonight. One of those things is your time. So please do go and see our volunteer organisers over to my left here after these speeches. But the other thing that we really want is your money. We do not have the deep pockets of the major parties of the Labor and the Liberal Party, who are, backed to the teeth by the gambling lobby, by fossil fuel companies, by all sorts of, the sorts of scum that they rule for. We don't even, frankly, have the deep pockets of the Greens, who managed to raise $100,000 in a single weekend. We want to raise $100,000 between now and the election day. We need that money to get up billboards, posters of Jerem and Liz. We need that money to make sure that we can stuff every single letterbox in the northern west of Melbourne with letters talking about the Victorian Socialist project. We're trying to fight, the kind of big business. We're trying to fight the kind of established political parties, and to do that in their arena means we need money. So tonight there's a range of ways that you can help us raise that money. One thing is just by giving outright donations, making a pledge to Victorian Socialists. Roz has a whole team of people going through the crowd tonight, talking to people about what they think they can afford. But we've also got raffle tickets. Please do see our raffle team over in the corner there. There's all sorts of wonderful prizes, books and chocolate and wine and other assorted goods. Please do get your raffle tickets. We've also got Lucky Dip books. You can pay $10. There's like little clues to what the books might be. And then you get to unwrap a little gift and find out what you've got. So please do help us raise some money so that we can fight the powers that be in their arena. We'll also be selling dinner afterwards. I think I mentioned before, our volunteers have been working hard on an Iranian feast inspired by and honouring the uprising happening in Iran right now. So you can buy your tickets for the meals at the Lucky Dip bookstall just over here to my right. Okay, the next speaker I want to introduce is Naui Jimenez. Naui is a Mexican-Australian. She's standing for the seat of Brunswick. She first got involved in politics in 2014 in Mexico, fighting for justice for the families of murdered student activists. When she came to Australia, she threw herself into fighting that injustice once again. She joined the campaign against racism and fascism and took the fascists on in the streets. Now he is responsible for many a tearful proud boy. She also, in 2018, organised with the African community to take on the absolute racist lies and vitriol being put out by the mainstream press, the lies of African gangs. I think, one of Naui's most kind of recent fights against racism has been standing with refugees. She was, as part of a member of CAF, she helped to organise weekly demonstrations. There were lots of people who organised weekly or even daily demonstrations outside the hellhole hotels, the makeshift prisons that kept refugees locked up in this state. She helped organise those demonstrations. The resistance of those refugees, the resistance of the people on the streets actually had some success in having those refugees released. When people tell us that protests don't work, that people power is dead, we know that's not true, because we've been part of fights, big and small, that have seen that dial move just that tiny little bit in our favour. And I guess that's why we're all here tonight, because we want to try to give that dial a shove in the left-wing direction. So now he's going to talk a bit about the Victorian Socialist vision for a world free of racism and fascism.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to everyone in this room that Australia has been the inspiration of far-right parties around the world when it comes to the torture of refugees, when it comes to tightening borders, and racist policing of migrants. As Kath said, over the past 2 years, I've been part of a campaign to free the park hotel refugees with CARF. And these men were brought to Australia in 2019 to receive medical treatment, often for conditions that they developed in these hellholes. Often, these conditions that they developed because they didn't have access to clean water, they were malnourished. And one of these refugees who came to Australia was Don Khan, and he is a Rohingya refugee who was fleeing Myanmar. He is my age, he's 26, and he was in prison for over 9 years of his life. He had, 9 years of his life stolen for the simple crime of wanting safety. And one, I think, of the most appalling things about, these torture camps that we saw in the middle of the city was that you could literally see the refugees in these windows. You could literally see them. You could often be on calls with them, talking about, their experiences of detention. And really what fueled and inspired everyone to actually resist this torture was their own protests that they had in these detention centers, where they would protest every day, and that inspired refugee rights activists everywhere to come in, day out, every Friday to protest this torture. And what happened, when these refugees were detained? Daniel Andrews did not lift a single finger to help them. Instead, what he did, he sent cops to harass refugee rights activists. And we know that Victoria Police has increasingly been militarized. They're often sent to every single protest around Melbourne to push people off the streets. And that is actually what the Labor government represents. Victorian Socialist is the only party that is for defunding the police and redirecting that funding into social welfare. And I think, we need to abolish the police, actually, but that is a very good start. VS is also proud to have, members, again, who organize these weekly protests. Jerem, Liz, we're part of that, going every Friday out there. And I think it's important to say that this campaign, even though we won, the freedom of the Medivac refugees, the fight did not end there. They got bridging visas, which don't allow them to have education, welfare, housing. And they're often, at the moment, they're being faced with deportation. So there is a lot to be done there. And this is why Victoria is calling, Victorian Socialist is calling for Victoria to be a sanctuary state. We think that there should be absolutely no deportations here. We want to welcome refugees. We think that there should be spending into education, into welfare, into assisting refugees in coming to Australia and being able to be resettled here. We want to increase funding to specialist community legal services to ensure refugee, asylum seekers, and migrant workers can access legal assistance for visas and immigration issues. Of course, the racist incarceration system doesn't just impact refugees. Recently, we've seen the news that Victoria spends more than $1 million a day in incarcerating people who haven't been convicted of a crime. $1 million a day. That is, how much money you could be redirecting that money into housing refugees, the public housing that Colleen just spoke about. Clearly, there is enough money in this system to house every single refugee, every single homeless person, but that is not the priorities of our systems, and it's not the priorities of the people who rule us either. We see a trend of the privatization of the prison industry and the profit-making of mass incarceration, which has seen the state's prison population increase by 70% in the last decade, while crime rates remained stable. And this racist prison system affects people of color, the poor, and the homeless. We think that it's important to raise the age of criminal responsibility to at least 14. We want to decriminalize public drunkenness and review the Summary Offences Act to identify other similar crimes to be replaced. And I think this one is really important because, as we know, Tanya Day was murdered through these racist policies. And obviously, we need to be banning, the construction of new prisons. Another threat, like people have mentioned, is the far right. And today they are growing in numbers. So we've seen, Trump in the US, we've seen Bolsonaro in Brazil, and most recently we've seen the election of Giorgia Meloni, who is, an outright fascist in Italy. So the global far right have returned to the stage with force, and I think Australia is by no means an exception. Establishment politicians from, the Liberals to the Labor and the Greens have offered nothing to stop them from growing. At the same time, at the state level, they've all made preferences with Glenn Drury, which have actually allowed far-right micro-parties to get elected. We think that this is an absolute outrage, and we think the VS will never do a deal that allows for the far-right to gain any seats, and we will not be making any deals with Drury. And, while liberal do-gooders were, always for the past 5 years saying, the way to stop the far right is by ignoring them, you shouldn't be protesting, you're basically as bad as them if you protest them. Victorian Socialist members were out there kicking Reclaim Australia off the streets and calling them what they really are, which are Nazis. Today, the far right in Australia, of course, is also gaining traction. There's new and old faces everywhere. And as people have mentioned, Liz is facing off Bernie Finn. And yeah, he's a bigoted, misogynistic creep, that spent most of his years in the Liberal Party. And for over a decade, he has been organizing, the March for the Babies. And I think it's important to say that he has been one of the key figures that has allowed for the far right to grow. In 2018, some of his security at the March for the Babies was Tom Sewell, who is a Nazi, who's part of the NSN, who is the group that, made the Nazi salutes out in the Grampians. This is the kind of scum that Bernie Finn associates himself with. So a fight actually happening in the West at the moment is Liz against the far right, and we need to fucking beat them. So I just want to end with what socialists are for. Socialists are for open borders. Socialists are for the free movement of ordinary people. We are for refugees burning their detention centers to the ground and being allowed to come into this country. Socialism is a world where ordinary people get to move freely, a world where ordinary people get to impose their will onto society, and that's the kind of world that Victorian Socialist is fighting for.
I've kept Naui up here because I know in the original version of her speech she was going to end with a chant. So let's do that now. Black, Indigenous, Arab, Asian and white, unite! Unite! Unite to fight the right! Black, Indigenous, Arab, Asian and white! Unite! Unite! Unite to fight the right! Black, Indigenous, Arab, Asian and white! Unite! Unite! Unite to fight the right! Thank you, Naui. And yeah, if you want to help us be part of that fight to push the far right, not just off the streets, but out of Parliament, then I really encourage you to sign up to be part of the early voting and the election day so that we can make sure that the likes of Bernie Finn don't grace our Parliament again. So one of the things I think that makes me most proud to be a socialist is how many of our members are trade unionists, are trade union activists. And I know right now there are lots of people who've recently led strike action, which you couldn't say in many places given the historically low rate of strikes that we have today. but we have people here who helped organise the walkouts in early childhood education. We have people here who've been part of strikes in the manufacturing and construction industry. You know, one of the obvious kind of measures of the kind of class war and the fact that our side is not right now winning that class war is the fact that the wealthy get richer and richer, that the billionaires have been doubling their wealth while life continues to get harder and harder for us. And it's not just the greed of those at the top. Actually, sometimes it's the betrayals of those on our own side. The likes of the Labor Party, who want to keep public sector workers, teachers and nurses who just went through absolute hell in the pandemic, are enforcing on these workers an actual pay cut in real terms. And I'm really proud of the fact that socialists have been on the forefront of fighting to push that back, of fighting for pay rises that actually go above inflation rates. You know, the reason that our wages have been stagnant and now going backwards is not just about the greed of the bosses, but it's been a weakness on our own side. It's been an unpreparedness of many of the union officials to take the action that is necessary to fight for workers' rights, to fight for our side in this class struggle. We've had socialist nurses in Western Australia, in New South Wales, fight to push their unions to accept a pay rise above inflation. As I said, we've got people in the audience today who've been part of those battles. And the person that I'm about to introduce, Viraj Disanyake, is a striker. He's on strike right now. Today is his 36th day on strike. The strikers at the Knauf plasterboard factory are entering now their 6th week on strike. Victorian Socialists want to see more of this. It's a fighting working class movement that we're going to need if things are going to get any better for us. So yeah, I'm really, really proud to be able to introduce my comrade Viraj.
Thank you, Kay. Well, I'm one of the 74 workers at the Knauf plasterboard factory in Port Melbourne. We have been on strike for 36 days now. Knauf are the biggest plasterboard company in the world. They control half of the market in Australia. So if you look at any internal wall or ceiling in this city, there's a 50-50 chance you're looking at a Knauf product. The strike started when Knauf management locked us out for asking for a decent pay rise and safe staffing levels. Management want to be able to introduce more labor hire and casualize our jobs. They only offered us a pay rise, not even half of the level of inflation. In the other words, they wanted us to take a massive pay cut. We told them to get staff. Yes, we are a strong CFMU workplace. When management put their substandard EBA to a vote, not a single worker voted for it. When we had a vote for industry election, every single worker voted for every type of industry election. When we put bans on, management locked us out. So we voted to turn the lockout into an indefinite strike. We have been out in the grass for more than 5 weeks now. This company makes plenty of money from our labor. The part of Knauf that we work for, formerly known as Boral, paid their top 6 executives a combine of 5.7 million last year. Management has costed every single one of our claims. at 1 million per year, a fraction of top management salaries. It seems they value their executive salaries more than our job security and wages. And they want to be able to break our power by introducing labor hire. It's important to say here, we are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for everyone who will work for Kanoof in the future. We are fighting for all of the workers in construction, manufacturing, and in other industries who are facing casualized jobs and cuts to their pay because of inflation. So right now, we are your front line, and we need your solidarity in that front line. We have been supported all the way through by our union, by many groups, including Victorian Socialist. You can support us by donating to our strike fund, pass motion of support and solidarity for us in your unions, and invite a striking worker in as a guest speaker. More than any of these, please come down to the picket line in Port Melbourne. It's running from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. on weekdays. All right, to finish, this is an election meeting, so I should say something about the election. I have known Liz and Jerome for a long time. I know they are staunch fighters who are absolutely dedicated to organizing, fighting, and generally raising hell alongside working class people. And building a socialist political voice. That's why I'll be an active part of Victorian Socialist election campaign. And I hope everyone here will do the same thing. The great black American freedom fighter Frederick Douglass once wrote, "Power concedes nothing without a demand." Well, we have made our demands, and we won't stop fighting until we win. I know you will join us in that fight. Solidarity, comrades.
Thanks, Viraj. I think that fight is something the Victorian Socialists really embody. So we would ask you all to get down to the picket line to speak to Viraj and his workmates. I think one of the most touching moments of solidarity that we saw was actually organised by Viraj and Danny, who was around before somewhere. Yeah, Danny. Who's been is a delegate at another workplace in the West that was on strike. And those striking workers organised to cross the Westgate Bridge to go and meet each other to show their solidarity because they're part of the same fight. Victorian Socialist is all about trying to draw those links together. So the next speaker and our final speaker for the night that I want to introduce is someone who spent his life trying to draw those links. Jerome Small is our candidate for the upper house of the Northern Metro. Jerome is not like the kind of stuffy old politicians that grace the halls of Parliament today. Jerome is a worker. He spent decades working on construction sites as a member of the CFMEU. He spent his time as a socialist in the last few years as a socialist industrial organiser. As Viraj said, raising hell alongside working class people, standing with workers in aged care, trying to fight against privatisation. He helped me organise one of the first strikes, the first strike in the railways in this state for almost 20 years. He stood along workers, fighting casualisation, fighting for decent pay, fighting for a better world. And he's exactly the kind of hellraiser that we want to see elected to Parliament this November. Please make Jerome welcome.
Wow. It's amazing being able to see you all. What a great event. hard act to follow. In fact, that's probably 5 or 6 pretty hard acts to follow. I guess I wanted to expand on, a little bit on what Kath said. In terms of working class fighters, obviously Viraj is not the only one in the room. We've got Danny over here. Get to know Danny. He led the Keynos strike, was one of the main delegates. A lot of you visited that picket line. We've got Ruby over here, who organised in a childcare centre and blitzed national TV and radio, talking about, yes, childcare is too scarce, the wages are too low, and the reason for that is because the whole system is run by profit. This is like on the 9 o'clock ABC radio news. I was expecting the authorised by Victorian Socialist. It was not, like, it was just such a breath of fresh air. We've got Liam, I think, is looking after the live stream. One of the activists, and Alex over here, who at the start of the COVID pandemic, when the union in tertiary education said, oh, great idea, guys, let's cut national wages by 15% across the board, like Liam and Alex and a whole bunch of comrades, when you could only organise on Zoom, managed to make some of the biggest meetings that union has ever seen, a national rank and file revolt, one of the biggest that we've ever seen, that knocked that 15% wage cut stone cold dead as a national proposal. So that was a pretty good. I'm not sure whether we've got Ruby in the, I'm not sure whether we've got Beth in the house. A Victorian Socialist member who messaged me during the week saying basically how friggin' great it was to see Victorian Socialist people turning up to every single picket line. So I was hoping you'd make it. Maybe you're on the live stream, Beth. Beth is she's no slouch when it comes to organising either. Victorian Socialist member who just happens to have organised Penguin Random House, the biggest publishing company in the world, their Australian operation, now heading towards their second EBA. She was victimised for it, not the first, not the last, but like, we've got so many staunch fighters. We've got people like Liz Ross, like Tanya McConville, like Jerry Beaton, like Mick Armstrong, like Sandra Bloodworth. We've got the older generation who have been through fights thick and thin. We've got a younger generation, people from the Renters and Housing Union, one of the very few groups that I've ever seen in this town making an issue of the high cost of rent. We've got young university students and young workers who have come across socialist ideas for the first time and who are getting the hell stuck in. We've got the activists. I remember reading something somewhere about the point of a socialist political party is to find the very best fighters, to weld them together into a political movement, for us all to arm ourselves with the lessons of the working class movement, the fact that workers are always the solution, the fact that bosses are always the problem, some of the lessons in terms of, tin tax, how to manoeuvre all the rest of it, and to apply them in the struggles of today. And to see Victorian Socialists take shape as something like that project of a very small but a very solid step towards reviving socialism as a political movement in the daily conversations all around this country and all around this state is an amazing thing to see. So give yourselves a round of applause for being part of a project that actually stands to make history, has a chance of making history this November. Good for every single one of you. So we've got the activists. This is meant to be about the policy, so I better talk about that. We have quite a few policies. I'm going to talk about the workers and union rights. And, like every policy document has a bit of a preamble, and you're used to reading these things, and there's sort of a few drab dot points or whatever. Have a read of the preamble. I'm pretty pleased with the preamble to the workers section, which basically says the working class create all the goddamn wealth. We should be the ones electing management if we need them and sacking them if they behave badly. So maybe Danny and Viraj could add that to the log of claims, but just a suggestion. But our log of claims for the election is pretty ambitious. I won't go through them all, but a few of my favourites. Legal aid for migrant workers. From the state government might not be able to redraw the borders, but they can definitely declare a sanctuary state. One of the things that should mean is legal aid for migrant workers who face horrific oppression in the workplace. And anyway, like many stories that you hear on polling booths of people just being, having their dignity and their wages and their conditions robbed off them on a daily basis. And one of the reasons for that is because of the second-class visas that Labor and Liberal have kept migrant workers on for so long. So the very least the state government should be doing is flooding the legal aid system, not, yes, definitely to look after every single person with a housing problem, with a law problem, whatever, but migrant workers have to be on that list. Allowing workers, making it legally possible for workers to picket their workplace at a strike. To be able to legally say, what should be the case already, look, buddy, you might think that you've got a right to go to work, but we've had our democracy here in this workplace. We've taken a decision. We are out on strike, and it is not up to you to break that solidarity. You are not going through. That should be a legal act in Victoria. Annual elections for health and safety reps for the vast majority of workplaces that don't have a health and safety rep. Okay, the boss's stooge, the boss's best friend, the boss's cousin is going to get in a lot of workplaces in that first election. But having at least an annual contest about health and safety that must involve every worker in the workplace, this should be an absolute no-brainer. And it tells you something about the Labor Party, that they've got this very nice piece of legislation, the Health and OHS Act of 2005, whatever it was, that it may as well not exist in a huge majority of workplaces because there's no health and safety reps. There's a whole bunch more policies. A couple that I'm really attached to are the policies on outsourcing and the end to privatisation, and Liz has already talked about that. Labor talk a big game now about, the evils of privatisation. Hang on. Excuse me, these guys took power from Jeff Kennett in 1999. They have been in power for 19 of the past 23 years. They've done absolutely sweet fuck all to reverse any of the privatisations. Since that time, now a month out, they decide they're going to revive the SEC. State Electricity Commission, okay, which version are they going to revive? The 23,000 strong workforce and the fully publicly owned version that they inherited in the early 1980s? Or the semi-privatised, neoliberalised, slimmed down, right-sized 13,000 strong workforce that they handed over to the Liberals well on the way to the privatisation, and then Kennett finished the job. So we'll see. I'm a big sceptic about announcements made on the basis of nothing much a month out from the election. And even if it's best case scenario, 83% of council refuse collections are still done by private operators. Why is that? They should be, the work is ongoing. It should be employed by the council. There's a lot of work to do there, a lot of campaigning work to do there, and should be a lot of picket lines to win all of those, to insource all of those vital services. So that's one area. The other one is wages. It used to be a standard demand of pretty much the entirety of the union movement that any government that purports to be for the workers, any government that pretends to be progressive, any government that wants workers' votes should lead on wages. Like the fact that the Dan Andrews government has a 1.5% wage cap right now, when inflation is above 7% with a bullet, it should be an absolute disgrace. These people should be embarrassed to show themselves in public with that sort of wages policy. Our policy is for the insourcing of government services. Anything that is left outsourced, you need a service, whatever, there should be a union agreement in place. There should be a minimum of $30 an hour for each of those services that the government department employs. And for government employees, it should be at least CPI plus 2.5%. That is not a lot to ask. That's the policy that we're taking to the election. And since we're on wages, one of the more popular parts of our policy, it's amazing how popular socialist principle can actually be. It has been a socialist principle in our movement for 150 years that the representative of the workers gets no special privileges. They get no special wages. They do not raise themselves up on the backs of workers. If they want to go up, the entire class has to go up. So it has been an important point of socialist principle for 150 years or more that if workers' parties and socialist parties get a member of parliament elected to parliament, they should take the average wage of a skilled worker. We've pegged that to the wage, I think it's a 6-year nurse who only gets paid $87,000 apparently in the state of Victoria on a public enterprise agreement. We will not take, well, we will take the $191,000 base rate and the $50,000 travel allowance, thank you very much, Our personal income will be $87,500 and the rest goes to community campaigns. Talk about all of the things which are in, and to campaign about all of the things which are in our program. So we've got the activists, we've got the policies, and then when you combine the activists with some mashup of the policies, that is the campaign, and the heart of the campaign is the pitch. It is you looking at a voter, looking at a person on a door knock, on a street stall, on a voting booth, wherever, between now and November 26. And I did a bit of letterboxing with a volunteer out in Roxburgh Park today, and, you know, I've got a pretty well-established pitch, you know, a couple of guys out in the front yard, Steve and Ahmed, and I go, hey, just for the state election, we're Victorian Socialists, we're pretty damn radical, we think it's absolutely crazy that it's the sort of people that live in suburbs like this, in Roxburgh Park, that do all the goddamn work, that drive the trucks, that build the buildings, that look after the sick, that teach all the kids. How come so much of that wealth ends up not in Roxburgh Park, but in Toorak, or in Brighton, or in Collins Street? We think everything is the wrong way up. We're not promising that voting for one or two socialists into Parliament is going to change all of that, but we are definitely up for building a people power movement to pull some of those billions and some of that power back. To which Steve and Ahmed go, yeah, shit, yeah, no, that's good, yeah. And then I couldn't talk him into a core flute, but, you know, a campaign sign. But it's a pitch like that, and then, you know, often opening up with, okay, what motivates you in this election? You get back climate change, you get back cost of living, a huge one. You get back racism. Sometimes you get back, oh shit, I don't know, everything's just too stuffed. Like, you know, you get back all sorts of things, but that is the campaign. And with a pitch like that, in Roxburgh Park at the federal election, 2 voting booths, we got 10.5% and 9.5% of the vote. A lot of people had not heard of us before. It's just like, shit, yes, I'm voting for this. In Craigieburn, votes of 6% of 8% on you know, in the far north. In some parts of the west and the inner north, you know, like 6%, 8%, 12% on a booth. And other times, you know, unfortunately, some of you are going to be slogging it out on booths where you are just like, oh my God, this is such hard work, and, you know, at least we got 3 or 4% at the end of the day. All of that can add up to a possibility of myself or Liz being the first socialist elected to a parliament in Australia basically since 1947. So it's our opportunity. And as I've said before, the point of that is not for me and Liz to have pictures of ourselves and the parliamentary buffet on our Instagram each morning, you know? The point of that is to call out the lies and hypocrisy in that place. The point of that is to act as a megaphone for every single struggle that is going on. The point of that is to pull socialism off the margins of political life and into the daily conversations, and to take a small but very important step to reviving socialism as a living, breathing, fighting, organising, controversialising force in Australian political life. That's our chance to make history. Let's take it with your help, with your solidarity, with all of our solidarity this coming November. Thank you.
Who doesn't want to be part of that then? So, yeah, if you want to get involved, one of the very next things that we have coming up is we do have a door knock tomorrow in both the west and the north. It's an opportunity to get out, to knock on doors, to talk to people about the things that they care about, talk about what we're going to do to fight for a better world. So I would encourage you to get along to those. The one in the north is going to be 12:30 tomorrow. We'll be going into the electorates of both Preston and Northcote, which is where, incidentally, I'm a candidate. We're going to meet at Bell Station. And if you're keen to get involved with the West campaign, they'll be meeting at 12:30 at Werribee Station. And yeah, I really do encourage everyone who hasn't already signed up to get involved in election day and early voting to go and see our volunteer organisers over to the side here. And yes, please stick around, spend your money, buy a Lucky Dip book, buy your dinner, get a raffle ticket, make a donation. But I think it wouldn't be a proper socialist gathering if we didn't end on a chant. So I'm going to ask everyone to stand with me now and chant, I guess, the traditional and important slogan of the workers' movement. The workers united will never be defeated. The workers united will never be defeated. The workers united will never be defeated. workers united